are common to most.
So, here in the video, naklaro na ang audio. Medyo kusog-kusog na. So, giingon diri. So, you have to refer sa manual if you are not that familiar with that valve. So, always read that fucking manual. Mag-na-ipir may isulti dito sa uh, barko. So, ahead of time or for the next day, you are planning to conduct maintenance on certain machinery, you have to review kung di pa nimo kabisado ang or new ka na nga barko, so it's better to read the manual or double check na lang para masigurado ka, and you have to also prepare the tools needed for conducting maintenance para kinaugma or kinabukasan diretso na ka sa imong trabahoon. So,
Yes. When you're ready to start work on the valve, gather all the necessary tools for the job, including hand tools, measuring tools, cleaning tools, and any special tools suggested by the valve manufacturer. Inspect each tool carefully to make sure that it's in good condition.
Mawa ang audio sir pag mag-mute ka.
Obstruct maintenance or create a safety hazard. The valve must be taken out of service before it can be worked on. For some valve maintenance jobs, the system that the valve is part of must be taken out of service. In other cases, it may be possible to bypass the valve and still keep the system in service. In any
okay, so before conducting maintenance in any valve, you have to see to it that the system where the valve is connected, kung dapat ba siyang okay na ba niya siya i-shut off or you need to bypass the flow of the fluid or the medium flowing into it. So, again, ibalik na po taning isulti ninyo, you have to familiarize the piping systems in the engine room. Para pag conduct ng maintenance sana, dili mo, example, fuel line din na, shut off din nyo, bulilyaso na. So, ganina, it is also stated that you have to prepare the working area. Mahimo, limpyuhan din ninyo daan, remove all the obstacles. So, those are the basic kuha na siya. Basic practice in conducting maintenance sa asa. So, mga debris, sa panadahang mga unwanted nga mga butang-butang. So, you have to clear the working area.
case, the valve should be locked out and tagged in accordance with your facility's procedures before any work is done on it. Likewise, all pressure must be relieved from the valve and all fluid must be drained. The mechanic has made all of the necessary preparations, and the valve has been taken out of service. Now let's see how he removes the valve from the system so that he can take it to a shop for repairs.
So, unsa ni nga kuan? Unsa ni siya nga type sa valve? Based sa inyong kuan. Visual nga.
Globe valve, sir. Globe valve.
Okay, so that is a globe valve.
Valve removal procedures may differ depending on how the valve is attached to the system. In our example, the mechanic will remove a globe valve that is connected to the system by flanges. The mechanic sprays each flange bolt with a penetrating lubricant and then loosens the bolts on the side opposite from where he is standing. This helps the mechanic avoid injury by releasing any trapped pressure away from him.
Okay. So, very basic. Nandiyan na siyang procedure or technique or especially sa mga valves nga pressurize ang gadagan or high pressure. So you have to loosen the bolt dili ari nga side kundi sa opposite side para if any pressure nga iyang i-release, it is away from the or away from you or away from the person who is conducting the maintenance. So ang opposite side nga bolt ang imong unahog luag.
Loosening the flange bolts may also result in a small amount of fluid leaking out from between the flanges. This is normal, and it can occur even when the pipeline has been drained. The bolts are loose and can now be removed. The mechanic takes them out one at a time until only one bolt remains in the flanges at each end of the valve. The two bolts that the mechanic leaves in place are diagonally across from each other to provide maximum support. If the valve is large, rigging or other types of support should be used. If necessary, rigging should be attached before the valve is free. Personnel can be injured, and the seating surfaces of the valve and the flange can be damaged if the valve crashes to the floor. Before these last two bolts are removed, the valve must be supported by some other means. If the valve is small, another maintenance worker can hold the valve in place while the last two bolts are removed. This valve is large, so rigging is necessary. The mechanic can now remove the old flange gaskets. Anytime a flange is taken apart, the gaskets should be replaced. The mechanic stores all removable parts, such as nuts and bolts, together in a safe place so that they are readily available when they're needed for reinstallation. Finally, with the valve properly supported, he carefully lifts it out. As with any plant component, valves are susceptible to problems. One of the most common valve problems that maintenance personnel encounter is excessive packing gland leakage. In order to properly control valve leakage, maintenance personnel should be familiar with the construction and use of packing. In this part, we'll see how to adjust, remove, and replace packing. The packing used in valves is typically a rope-like material made from strong natural or synthetic fibers woven together with a binder substance, such as grease or wax. It's used to control leakage around the valve stem. Packing is housed in an assembly called a packing gland. The packing fits around the valve stem and fills a cavity called a stuffing box. A device called a gland follower fits into the stuffing box to compress the packing. When the valve is fully assembled, the gland follower is tightened to exert pressure on the packing and hold the packing in place. Let's watch as this mechanic adjusts the packing in a globe valve. He compresses the packing by alternately tightening the gland nuts in a clockwise direction. This causes the gland follower to push against the packing, compressing it. To ensure even compression, he tightens each gland nut one flat at a time. A flat is equal to about 1/6 of a full revolution. A ruler can be used to check the gland follower for even compression. To do this, measure the distance from the top of the packing gland to the bottom of the gland follower. If the gland follower has been tightened correctly, the measurements should be the same at both gland bolts. The packing should be compressed enough to prevent leakage, but not enough to prevent movement of the stem. After the packing is adjusted, rotate the hand wheel open and closed to make sure that the stem can still move freely. As the packing is adjusted over time, the gland follower may eventually be tightened so much that it comes to rest on the bonnet. If this occurs, the gland follower is bottomed and cannot be tightened any further. When this happens, the packing should be removed and replaced. Worn or damaged packing must also be replaced. Let's look at an example of how to remove valve packing. Most valves are designed so that the packing can be replaced without having to disassemble the entire valve. In some cases, it may be necessary to remove the valve's hand wheel to gain access to the packing gland. With larger valves like this one, the hand wheel may not have to be removed when the valve is repacked. The mechanic sprays a penetrating lubricant on the bolts to make the gland nuts easier to remove. If the nuts are rusty and won't move, the lubricant should be given a few minutes to work. Using excessive force may twist or break the bolts. Now the mechanic turns the gland nuts counterclockwise to loosen and remove them. He stores all the parts together in a safe place. After the gland nuts are removed, the mechanic raises the gland follower. On this valve, the gland follower cannot be completely taken off while the stem is still in place and surrounded by packing. Instead, it's held out of the way with a wire. Keeping the sharp end of the packing hook clear of the valve stem, the mechanic removes the rings of packing one at a time. This step is done carefully because scratching the stem with the packing hook could cause liquid to leak past the packing when the valve is put back in service. A scratched valve stem could also damage the packing as the stem turns. The number of rings, the packing type, and the packing design will all vary from valve to valve. A die and tap are normally used to make new threads, but they can also be used for chasing or cleaning threads. When they're used for chasing, the die is threaded onto the bolt, and the tap is threaded into the nuts. The die and tap must be correctly threaded on the bolt and nut threads. This avoids cross-threading or cutting new threads, which will destroy the original threads. The die and tap should be the same thread size and type as the bolt and nut. To chase the threads on a bolt, spray the bolt with a lubricant and thread the die onto it. Then move the die back and forth to clear the threads. Back the die off and remove it when the chasing is.
Okay, so in some cases, kana nga mga bolt or nuts, or wala ni siya naka-attach ang ato ang bolt, di siya connected sa ato ang bonnet. So, careful in removing that. You have to place all the bolts and nuts in, for example, na kay pan, kay gamay nga pan, or na kay gamay na balde. So, it is very important also to clean every bolt and nuts. So, some uses die and tap, and also ang uban pwede ra gatong na siya'y itawag ana or siya grinder pero or brush ang iyahang material. So, pwede ra na nimo iduot dito. Bang kape.
Kapras din, kapras.
Dili gid siya ingon katong cup brush, di ba? Di cup brush kaya atong i-attach unto sa atong katong murag grinder. Natay ka ng grinder nga naka-fix na instead of katong murag lingin, this ang kabutang, ura siya brush. Ato ra nimo idot. Kalimot ko say tawag nga konsa? Nakamute ka, sir. Naka-mute ka. Naka-mute ka, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. As you look at, kung asa ko gamay na no? Okay. Take note, kanina nag-emphasize kung ito nung what you call when you're going to dismantle. But as a beginner, when you're going to take out the flange, ito yung flange, no? Yung kabilaan. See to it that you're going to put marking. Ang ayan lang na siya o medyo di pa expert na mo. What is the reason for that? Kayo na ay sometime ang kining barbula nas ubos ang pagkuanana. Now, see to it ang position niya, tingaling makalimot mo, pareha mo na kung ang limtanon. So you're going to put marking this one on the other side of the flange. Ang usa ka side na. Now, as you look at tanawon yung maayo, di ba mo ni packing no? Unya mo ni sa yoke dire, di ba? See to it ang hole. 5. See to it na nakainana na dili nagkanang diretso. You get my point? When you're going to take out ni na symbol, siguruan yun kini nga na inini ang position. Hindi ni kini siyang yok diri